Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's discussion. My name is Daniela Shimoni, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. In keeping with standard practice, all participant lines are muted. Please enter any questions you may have in the question box at any time. We will address all submitted questions at the end of the presentation. All webinar registrants will receive a follow-up email on how to access a recorded version of this webinar and information on the upcoming webinars. Today's topic is, what do really secure OT or ICS sites do differently? Presented by Andrew Ginter. Andrew Ginter is the VP of the Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions and works with many of the most secure industrial sites on the planet. He is the co-chair of ISA's SP99 Working Group 1 and co-author of the Industrial Internet Consortium Security Framework, and the author of 2 books on industrial security, SCADA Security, What's Broken and How to Fix It, and Secure Operation Technology. Andrew spent 20 years developing SCADA system and IT and OT middleware products, and another 20 designing control system security products. He holds a BS in Applied Mathematics and an MS in Computer Science, both from the University of Calgary. Andrew?
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you to everyone for joining us and listening in. Today, we're going to be talking about secure operations technology. This is my latest book. It is a book that describes what the world's most secure sites do, what they do differently from what everyone else does. Now, for the record, I work for Waterfall, but the book is not about Waterfall. It's about what we see our customers doing, because it's that class of customer that Waterfall serves primarily. What we see is that the sites that we serve, they ask different questions, they get different answers, they see the world differently. So this presentation and this book are about what those sites do differently, how their perspective differs from the rest of the sites that we run into. If you'd like a copy of the book, again, it's not about Waterfall, it's about what I see these sites doing. Waterfall, though, has purchased a batch of them and is making them available for free. There will be a URL on the end of the presentation where you can request your own free copy. So let's begin. Before we get into what secure sites do differently, let's look at what most people do. What is conventional security? Because secure sites do all of this as well. They do things in addition to what everyone else is doing. So what is conventional security? It's really reflecting older standards that we see that were published between about 2007 and 2012 or 2013. This is the first generation of industrial cybersecurity advice. What is it? Well, it's a little of everything. It's intrusion detection. It is some security monitoring, some incident response. It's passwords and permissions and role-based, architectures. It's antivirus systems and whitelisting and security updates and host hardening. There's firewalls, there's encryptions, there's VPNs, there's jump hosts, there's multi-factor authentication. There's all of this stuff because there's a lot of ways that attackers and malware can get into our system, and we have to defend against all of that. The bad stuff can come in on USBs, it can come in carried in on laptops that contractors are carrying in, it can come in online through firewalls, through Wi-Fi's, it can come in remotely through stolen passwords, and we generally have to deploy a lot of expensive security to defend against these classes of attacks in the classic, first generation architecture. It's not easy being the good guys. In particular, some of these mechanisms are really very expensive on industrial networks. Security updates, for example. Every security update is a threat to continuous operation. It's a threat to safe operation. Every change to the system has to be evaluated for that kind of risk. And we generally have to test, complex updates for a very long time before we trust them on our security, on our industrial network. So, there's a lot we have to do, and some of it's very expensive. And once we're done all of that first generation classic advice, what are we left with? Where are we left? What's left over? Well, when we talk about risk, there's really only three things we can do with risk. We can mitigate risk, which is take steps to do something about the risk, to reduce the risk. We either reduce the threat, we reduce the vulnerability, or we reduce the consequences of attack. All of these combine to reduce risk. Or we can transfer the risk. We can pay somebody else to accept the risk for us, usually an insurer. You pay insurance premiums. If the risk is realized, the insurer pays for the consequences. We don't do it ourselves. And if we do not mitigate the risk and we do not transfer the risk, we accept the risk, meaning we do nothing. If the risk is realized, we suffer the consequences. Sorry, lost track of where I was here. The question is really, once we've done conventional security, once we've done the first generation 2007 through 2013 security, the question is, what's left over? Is what's left over really acceptable? Should we be accepting it? Now, some people will say, well, we do accept all of the risks that are left over, therefore they must be acceptable. This is not what the world's most secure sites say. They set a standard. They say, this is what we're willing to accept, and we will not accept anything less. And they raise the bar, and they do more than first generation security. So this brings us to SecOT. What is it? Well, let's talk about perspective. Let's talk about priorities. The number one priority of conventional security is to protect the information, protect the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of information. Some people will say, oh, but in industrial networks, it's not CIA, it's AIC, availability first, or they'll say integrity comes first. But the priority for the first generation security systems is to protect the information. The goal that we see at secure industrial sites is not to protect the information. It is to protect continuous, correct, and efficient physical operations. It's to protect physical operations from information. More specifically, to protect physical operations, physical industrial operations from attacks that may be embedded in information. These sites, they ask different questions. They see the world differently. And again, don't get me wrong, SecOT is generally, not always, but generally in addition to all of that other stuff, all of the first generation stuff. Now, the SecOT sites we work with might relax some of the most expensive and the least effective security mechanisms from the first generation advice because they can, because they have some other powerful tools I'm going to be talking about. And what I'm talking about is relaxing a bit security updates. Don't deploy them the second they come out. Don't test them madly. You can delay things a little bit longer if you have strong additional mechanisms in place. So, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. You can reduce the cost of the most expensive conventional measures because you've implemented other very strong measures. These sites, they do all the conventional stuff. They just conclude that it's not enough for them. They need more. The SecOT perspective that I document is rooted in what I documented in my first book, which is the first three laws of SCADA security. Let me start with number 3. all cyber attacks are information. This is what cyber means. All cyber attacks are information. They always will be. This is the definition of cyber. And every single bit of information can be an attack. You know, a single bit can be an attack. A bit that says start the pump can be exactly the right bit to send in a message right now, because right now I need to start the pump, and it can be exactly the wrong thing to send 10 seconds from now, because I might not need the pump running 10 seconds from now. That one, if that bit is set incorrectly, then we have an attack. We have physical behavior of the physical system that we don't want. You know, working up, number two, all software can be hacked. All software has bugs after all. I mean, I wrote software for 20 years. I did not try to put bugs into my software. But, you know, for 20 years, in spite of my best efforts, in spite of all of my colleagues' best efforts, every piece of software we ever came out with had bugs in it. This is the nature of complex software artifacts. Some of those bugs were vulnerabilities. Some of those vulnerabilities had been discovered. Some of them we have not yet discovered, but our enemies might have. So in practice, all software can be hacked. And, you know, when we go back and we look at all of the measures in the conventional security slide that we saw here a second ago, this one, where is it? This one here. All these measures, there's only two kinds of you know, security here. There's people and there's software. That's it. So bear that in mind. I'm going to come back to that. And you know, the first law, nothing is secure. Security is a continuum. It's not a binary yes or no thing. The question, are we secure, is meaningless. I mean, security is like safety. Are we safe right now? Is every one of you and me right now safe? Well, yes, mostly. Could we be safer? Yeah, definitely. Could we be less safe? Yeah, definitely. It's a continuum. The question, are we safe, has no meaning. The question, are we secure, has no meaning. The question, how secure are we, has an answer. Security is a continuum. The really interesting question is, how secure should we be? And really secure sites basically say that the first generation of security is not as secure as we need to be. And they raise the bar. How do they do that? Well, we start with the third law of cybersecurity. All cyber attacks are information. Fundamentally, the only way that an industrial control system can change from an uncompromised state to a compromised state, the only way it can get hacked, is if attack information moves into the control system somehow through a physical perimeter or through a network perimeter. It's got to cross a perimeter into the control system. All attacks are information. There's no other way to compromise a control system. Now, the IT gurus, they will tell us the perimeter is dead. Where's the perimeter around our cell phones? How much data is on those cell phones? And they're right. The perimeter is dead on enterprise networks. On industrial networks, though, think about it. Every important industrial site that any of us have ever visited had a fence around it, didn't it? Had both a physical perimeter and a cyber perimeter, had guards, gates, and guns. Now you might ask, how do we know which sites are important enough to build a fence around? Don't ask me. I mean, physical security people have been doing this for centuries. You ask anybody, you know, any engineer, any physical security person, and they'll tell you what their criteria are for putting a fence around a site. Basically, if you need to protect the public from the dangerous processes in the site, or if you need to protect the site from the public, you put a fence in place. Anytime there's a physical perimeter, there ought to be an equally robust cyber perimeter. So what do secure sites do? They define the physical and cyber perimeters of their control critical networks. And I'll talk more about control critical networks, but a control critical network is generally not one control system network. It is a set. It's a number of control system networks looked at together. It's a bunch of control system networks. Once we've defined the control critical network and we've defined the perimeter around it, these sites take an inventory of all of the ways that information can enter the site, enter the industrial system through the perimeter. That inventory of incoming information flows, a complete inventory of incoming information flows, is also a complete inventory of attack vectors. With a complete inventory of attack vectors in hand, these sites now set out to systematically control those flows of information, preferably physically. Because, second law, all software can be hacked. How do we control those information flows? Well, there's fundamentally only two ways for information to move, for information to cross a control critical perimeter. Attack information, any information for that matter, can only move via offline or online means. Offline information is carried. It's physically, there's a physical object that's carried from one place to another. It might be a cell phone, it might be a USB drive. You know, my head, okay, my brain is a mechanism for moving offline, for moving information offline, because I move my brain around. If I have a password and malicious intent in my brain, and I carry my brain, I walk my brain past a physical checkpoint, physically into an industrial site, I have carried offline attack information in my brain into the site. So any way that information can enter the site is a potential attack vector. Inventory all of them. And what do we do about them? Well, again, there's only two ways to carry information, offline and online. Offline is carried. What do these sites do? Well, let's take some examples here. They have removable media control programs. Wherever practical, they control USB drives and CDs and other kinds of removable media. They control them physically. They glue shut all of the ports, the CD drives, the USB ports, even the floppy drives, if possible. And if not possible, well, if you need to carry information into the site, and everyone does, they put up antivirus scanning kiosks or workstations at the physical perimeter. You're not allowed to carry media into the site. You have to take it out of your pockets, take it out of your briefcase, and put it into the kiosk, and they scan it with, generally between 8 and 12 antivirus engines, all on that one, kiosk. And they scan it, and copy the files that they need onto brand new media. They'll take a brand new CD drive out of a box beside the kiosk, stick it in, copy the information onto the drive, and that CD is the only one they're allowed to carry in. They've got to leave behind all of their other potentially contaminated media. And what they do with that CD generally is just move it 1 meter over and drop it into a file server, load the files they need, and now they're on the network, on the industrial network, and they can pull the files anywhere they need to in the industrial network, and they're done with the CD, they throw it out. They just don't use removable media. And if we do have to use something, let's say USB drives or something on the industrial network, because this is how you program the PLC, there's no other way to do it. Well, you don't use your own USB drives. There are well marked. There's a box of USB drives that are allowed to be used in the industrial networks. These drives have never been inserted into an external machine. If you ever insert one of these into an external machine, destroy it. You're only allowed to use clean stuff inside the industrial network. And that's for very simple files. That's for files where you can verify, fairly easily, visually often, that the file is not going to do any damage to the site. When we've got complex files, let's say new antivirus signatures, new software updates, well, is the software update going to do any damage to the site? We don't know. What's in it? We don't know. The vendor sent us a list, but 18 megabytes of software have changed, and the list is only 2 pages long. We don't know what they changed. We don't know what the consequences are. That software does not go straight into the control system. It goes into a test bed. Thank you. These test beds, everyone has some kind of test bed generally, and these test beds are generally designed to test for threats to safe or reliable operations. What we see these sites doing, the secure sites, they instrument their test bed, not just for safety, not just for liability, they instrument it, they measure security. The test bed is like a great big sandbox, a security sandbox. You advance all of the clocks on the test bed to check if there's malware in there that's going to trigger in a week and erase all your hard drives. Oop, my hard drives on the test bed were erased. Don't put that software on the industrial network. And so, you know, we measure security. We turn on all of the auditing, everything. You know, the test bed's a very noisy environment. All the logging, we investigate all the false positives. We need to gain confidence in the new information artifacts. So there's a couple of examples of the kinds of things people do to control the offline movement of information, to control it physically. A lot of these physical protections, you know, people are, I imagine you've been reading these removable devices, new security, you know, that's like laptops, new equipment coming from the store, insider attacks. You know, a lot of people are going to say these are fairly familiar threats. These are fairly familiar kinds of programs. What's different at SecOT sites is the intensity that they bring to the job of blocking all of these offline information and attack flows. You know, it's not that the kind of protection is drastically different, it's how deeply and thoroughly and physically they seek to block these kinds of attacks. For example, one thing we're starting to see sites deploy is a cyber near miss program. This is like an OSHA, the Occupational Safe and Healthy Administration, safety near misses. You know, if with OSHA, if I put my hard hat on and my steel-toed boots and I walk into an industrial site and I walk under a crane that's lifting 10 tons of stuff, I walk under that and I'm clear of it, and 5 seconds later the chain breaks and 10 tons of stuff falls to the ground where I was walking. Well, I was not injured, but we have to fill out a safety near miss, because if circumstances had been just a little bit different, I would have been injured. There would have been a safety incident. We're seeing people do this for cyber near misses as well. So let's say we had to leave USB ports enabled on a couple of machines because that's how these machines work. And we've installed something like an endpoint, an endpoint protection software to give me alarms, give us alarms when someone uses these USBs. And figure out, are these users authorized or not? Every alarm that says, hey, I just blocked Andrew from mounting a USB drive because he wasn't allowed, every one of those alarms produces a near miss report. These reports are put together, they're summarized, they're analyzed, they're followed up, typically monthly. And, we discover that Andrew was responsible for 35% of our near miss reports this month, all having to do with USB keys. Someone has to go and train Andrew, thank you, to stop this from happening. What SecOT sites tell us is that the combination of their strict offline protections together with these cyber near miss programs essentially wipe out errors and omissions with USB drives and laptops and other devices. So, the offline controls are fairly familiar, but when it comes to the online controls, SecOT protections differ quite sharply, quite a bit from ITsec protection. SecOT forbids firewalls between control critical networks, between that bunch of control critical networks, forbids firewalls between that set of networks and external networks that are not managed to SecOT principles. SecOT sites allow only unidirectional gateway technology at those connections. Now, don't get me wrong, these sites still use firewalls a lot inside critical networks. They use firewalls a lot outside their critical networks. But at the boundary between the critical network and the non-critical network, that's where they deploy at least one layer of gateways instead of firewalls in their defense in depth, their Purdue style stack of their layers of networks. Now, for anyone not familiar with unidirectional gateways, here's a look inside. The unidirectional gateway in this diagram is everything in the red. And I've called it out as 3 pieces to make it clear that there's multiple stuff inside the gateway. The most common form factor for the gateways is actually a 1U rack mount device, but I've called it out as 1, 2, 3 devices here to make it clear that there's different functions inside the red, inside the gateway. The unidirectional gateway hardware at the center here is physically able to send information in only one direction, generally from the control critical network out to another network. It's physically able to send stuff out. Nothing at all gets back in. There's a fiber optic laser on the electronics on the left side of the device here. There's a short piece of fiber optic cable, and there's a fiber optic receiver on the right. The circuit board, the electronics on the right, has no laser. It physically cannot send any signal back to the sending network. The sending network is sending completely blind. I mean, the sending network does not even know if the receiving network is turned on. So the gateway can physically send in only one direction. Nothing at all gets back in. What does this mean? Well, if no information gets in, no attacks get in. It doesn't matter if an attacker has fuzzed a 0-day vulnerability in every piece of software on the planet. It doesn't matter if they've found a 0-day in every piece of security software on the planet. It doesn't matter if they've stolen every password for every account on every computer in the world. It's not physically possible to send any of that online attack information from the destination side of the gateway back into the source. This is physical protection. The hardware is one way. Now, there's also software that's part of every unidirectional gateway. The software replicates database servers and emulates devices. So, usually there's something on the inside of the network that is the focus of our IT/OT integration. It might be a SQL Server database, it might be a historian database, it might be an OPC server, but the software runs on conventional computers, Windows or Linux boxes, logs into the data source, whatever it is, with a normal connection, 2-way connection, username and password, nothing tricky, asks for all of the latest data and gets it, and then converts the data into the weird 1-way protocols, sends them out, and on the other side logs into an identical system and inserts the very latest data into the identical system. So now we have a replica, a copy server out on the outside network. That copy has got all the latest data, all the same data as the live system. Anybody who needs that data now connects to the copy and asks for the data normally. These are normal connections. All of these connections are normal connections except the weird one through the 1-way hardware. Everything else is a normal 2-way encrypted connection with username and password, nothing reverse engineered. So that's a unidirectional gateway. That's Waterfall's unidirectional gateways. You might ask though, how's this going to work? This is what a lot of people find very confusing. A lot of industrial sites have a lot of networks inside them, a lot of networks that are cooperating with each other. The operator HMI network needs information from the communications front end network that's connected to the PLC network. The historian needs information from the PLC and from the SCADA network. The SCADA network needs information back from the historian. Everyone's talking to everyone. If everyone is sending and no one is listening, how can this possibly work? Well, it doesn't. And you're right, that's not what we see. What we see these thoroughly secured sites doing is forbidding firewalls at connections between networks at different levels of criticality. Firewalls are used inside the control critical network. They're used outside the control critical network. It's this one layer here where we see the unidirectional gateways deployed between the very sensitive networks and the less sensitive networks. SecOT sites demand unidirectional protection at the network boundary, at the critical network boundary. Now, a lot of people ask if even that's practical. So, is even that going to work? Look at the industrial Internet of Things, the IIoT. The trend for 30 years has been more and more communications. That trend is, more and more connectedness. That trend is not going to turn around. The industrial internet is held up as the future of industrial control systems. But, let's look at how all of this communications really works. I'm a co-author of the Industrial Internet Consortium's security framework document. The framework is based on the Industrial Internet Consortium's reference architecture. The architecture and the security framework were developed and they were agreed to by a consortium of over 300 industrial vendors. All the big vendors were involved. This is, on the diagram here, this is the diagram from the IIC's reference architecture. It's cut and pasted. This is even their colors. The industrial control networks are at the bottom. Information flows are arrows. Inside the control network at the bottom, there is, information circulates. It moves around pretty freely. Think firewalls inside the control critical network. But at the higher levels here, there are white, green, and red arrows. This is, my apologies to anybody who's colorblind. These are the IIC's colors. The white and green arrows are safe communications. They are upward communications from lower levels to higher levels, and they're sort of sideways and internal communications within the same level. All of the downward arrows are red. All the downward arrows are some kind of control. Each and absolutely every message that is sent into a lower level of the architecture is some kind of control. Every one of those messages makes a computer, the next level down, execute some instructions that computer would not otherwise have executed. You've controlled the CPU in that computer by sending it a message. Every message is a kind of control and potentially an attack. And of course, the most dangerous control messages are the ones entering the control critical network at the bottom here from non-critical networks. What do we do about these messages? Well, if all we have is a firewall between the layers, well, what can we do? We open another TCP port. To a man with a hammer, all of the world is made of nails. To a man with a firewall, all problems are solved by take that hammer, whack, open another TCP port. What modern practice demands, what the IIC security framework documents, is disciplined control. When we need to send control information into a more critical network, and we often do, we have to send stuff in. When we need to do that, we use the most secure, the safest way that meets the business need, not whack, open another port. And as a reminder, all of the offline mechanisms that I talked about earlier, they're all dealing with kinds of control as well. The OT testbed, it's a very important kind of discipline for control. It's offline, it's slow, but that testbed is as safe as we know how to make it. So, but we're talking today, I'm talking, in this section of the webinar, we're talking about online information flows. How can we discipline online information flows? Here's a classic design. A control network has a lot of equipment in it, including an OPC server. The historian sits in a demilitarized zone between the control network and the enterprise network, and a business system in the enterprise network needs data from the historian to do billing, to optimize operations. There's lots of reasons for this kind of connectivity. The business system sends queries, questions into the historian and gets answers back. The historian sends queries, questions into the OPC server and gets answers back. So where can we draw the control critical boundary? Between each of these networks, there's questions going in one direction and there's answers coming in the other direction. Now, if we send polite questions, we get data back. If we send impolite questions, well, we're attacking the more critical systems right through any firewalls that we might have placed in the way here. Well, there is something we can do. We can deploy unidirectional gateways at the boundary between the control network and the DMZ. The gateway inside the red arrow here, remember, there's two computers, one on each side, and there's the strange one-way hardware in the middle. This technology, this gateway, the computer on the inside sends requests to the OPC server and gets data back, usually once a second. It gets all of the current state. It gets a snapshot of all of the tags and values inside the OPC server, converts the snapshot into the one-way protocols, sends it through the one-way hardware, and on the other side, the software is a standard OPC server. That server gets an update every second or so, a snapshot of all the industrial tags and values. And now, if the historian asks the gateway's OPC server for data, it gets exactly the same answer as the live system would have given, without ever sending a question into the industrial network that might be an attack on that network. We did not open a port and let the requests through. We eliminated the need to send any requests at all back into the industrial network from the DMZ. Getting rid of inbound incoming information flows is the best kind of discipline for those information flows. That's the best way to do discipline. So really what we did was we defined the control system network as our control critical network, and we deployed unidirectional protection at the boundary between this control critical network and the external network. Now, I'm guessing that a fair number of us listening might have heard this unidirectional stuff before. We might not really have looked into it. Maybe we looked into it a little and we concluded that it can't possibly work for us. What's new in the Black Book is a catalog of 20 network architectures, 20 different ways to design industrial networks, and documentation on how to use unidirectional gateways in every one of those kinds of networks. So the OPC example we just went through, that is number 2. That's device emulation. The historian replication I went through first in the first example was number 1. And there's another 18 examples. In a couple of years, this is the part of the book that's going to need an update, most likely. We continue to see secure sites inventing new ways to use unidirectional gateways for their different kinds of communications and business needs. And we're going to, I hope to be able to update the book with those new architectures as they become available, as I learn about them. The thing about this is that a lot of these network designs are kind of counterintuitive. And so this is why I wrote the book. If we want to be able to use this, the knowledge and the approach of the world's most secure sites, we have to know how they're doing unidirectional protection for lots of different kinds of networks, because our networks are in there somewhere. So let's look at this. I'm guessing that, a lot of us, you might be thinking that, oh, this didn't move. Hang on. There we go. A lot of us might be thinking that I cheated on the OPC example. Eliminating inbound communications completely is certainly discipline. It's not really control, though, is it? Let's look at an example of network architectures where we kind of do need online inbound communications. Many systems need to push antivirus signatures into their system on a regular basis, or into their test bed, so they can test them automatically and make sure that they don't quarantine any of the control system, and then push them into the control system automatically. We might need to send batch orders, production orders, into our control system on a regular basis. Every few hours, we top up our production orders so that we always have a week or 10 days of production orders queued up in case we lose contact with the SAP system. These are comparatively small documents, these batch orders, small XML documents, always ASCII, easy to verify that, these are safe instructions. How do we deal with these? Well, what we see secure sites doing is they deploy a kind of unidirectional gateway. They deploy a reversible unidirectional gateway. Waterfall has one of these. We call it the flip. The Waterfall gateway makes copies of OPC servers and historian servers and others out to the IT network most of the time, reasonably continuously. And every once in a while, it can reverse orientation. What does that mean? A reversible gateway is a true unidirectional gateway. It can only send information in one direction. It's a kind of gateway. It can send information in only one direction. And while when it's time, usually on a schedule, let's say 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, for 10 minutes, when it's time, it's as if the device physically picks up, flips over, and sets down. It can only send information in one direction, but it can send information one way out or one way in, but never both. This is a different kind of unidirectional gateway. While it's oriented inbound to the incoming network, this reversible gateway does not forward network traffic. It does not send messages from one network into another the way a firewall would. No unidirectional gateway forwards network traffic. That's what firewalls do. The gateway is a client on both sides of the network. It's a client of the antivirus server pulling the latest security updates, checking the authenticity, checking the crypto on the updates, pushing them through the one-way hardware, and on the inside, pushing the data into another antivirus server, or being an antivirus server itself. Same thing for the batch records. It's a client of the SAP system, the Enterprise Resource Planning system. It pulls the batch production orders, and on the inside pretends to be the SAP system and sends those orders into the industrial network the same way the SAP system would have. So no forwarding messages. It's a client on both sides. Here's discipline for you. We don't just open another TCP port or 3 and forward whatever packets the rule lets us forward. We pull exactly the information we need. We check that it's authentic. We send the information through to exactly where it's going. There's no network packets being forward here, containing who knows what kind of fuzzing and overflow or other attacks. We pull what we need and we send it where it's going one way. And then we flip back. And while we were oriented into the network, we were buffering everything that would have gone out. When it's time to go out, we send it. And so the systems on the outside are up to date again. So again, what we've done is we've modeled the control system as the entire control system as the control critical network. We've deployed unidirectional protection at the boundary of that network, protecting the control critical network from the enterprise network, from the IT network. One element of IT security that is in the last about 2 years working its way, very, very deeply into industrial networks is security monitoring. There's just too many benefits to central monitoring of operations. There's too many benefits to give up. The problem is that every path through a firewall that allows monitoring also allows attacks. And worse, the OT intrusion detection sensors that we hear so many vendors talking about, these things need to be connected to a span port or a mirror port on the industrial switches. The problem is that these sensors also need regular adjustment from the security operations center. So the right place to put these intrusion detection sensors is on the enterprise network. Put them on the enterprise network where the security analysts can reach into them easily, can adjust them without logging into the industrial networks all over the nation, all over the world some of the time, and potentially messing up who knows what kind of reliability critical systems we have on the industrial network. But if the sensor's on the IT network, now we have a path, an attack path back into the industrial network. But switch vendors, they say that their mirror ports are unidirectional, but often the documentation is not accurate. I've seen switch vendor documentation contradict itself in the same paragraph. And even if the port is kind of even if these mirror ports are kind of unidirectional, it's only software. Steal a password, reconfigure the switch, and now the mirror port's bidirectional. Attacks from the IT network can reach into the intrusion detection sensor and pivot through the sensor into the industrial network. The sensor is a dual-homed host. How are we going to fix this? What we see sites doing is deploying unidirectional gateways to emulate the switch ports out to the intrusion detection sensor. In fact, this has become so popular that Waterfall's released a new hardware product specifically for this use case, Waterfall for intrusion detection sensors. It is a, it's again a kind of unidirectional gateway, physically one way out, nothing back, optimized to the needs of security monitoring and OT intrusion detection systems. Operations departments don't want to introduce new connectivity into their OT networks. Unidirectional gateways enable safe central monitoring of these networks, no matter how sensitive they are, with zero risk of sending anything back in. So if you'll hang on for a second here, just a couple of words about Waterfall. We are the OT security company. Our focus is protecting physical industrial operations, protecting safe, correct, continuous, efficient physical operations. We've been around over a decade. We're deployed worldwide. We're deployed in basically all critical infrastructure sectors and then some. A lot of industrial sites that aren't even critical infrastructure. We invented unidirectional gateway technology. We have the patents to prove it. And the latest news with us is the latest news with everybody. I don't have it on the slide here, but we have, we're seeing a lot of the pandemic keeping people home, keeping experts from being able to travel to the sites they used to travel to do their work. For the next several months, hopefully until the pandemic goes away, Waterfall is giving away our remote screen view product. This is a safe one-way technology that will let you do remote support without putting these sites at risk with VPN connections and firewalls and passwords and who knows what. So for existing customers who've already got the hardware deployed, it's free. It's free and you just have to ask for the licenses. You can install the licenses and you can enable safe remote support. Before I wrap up, I also want to give a plug to the Industrial Security Podcast. This is something that, again, Waterfall sponsors, but it's not about Waterfall. It's about industrial security. We've got a different guest every episode. It's free. Go to your favorite podcast app on your cell phone, Android or iPhone, and search in the podcast app for industrial security, and you'll find us. A different guest every week talking about their view of industrial security. I'm one of the co-hosts, but again, the show's not about Waterfall. It's about our guests. That's what I had for you. The attack capabilities, the threat environment only gets worse over time. Our attackers only have more powerful tools and more powerful techniques over time. And what this means is that all of us are responding to this worsening threat environment by making our security programs stronger. The entire curve of how strong our security programs are, that entire curve is shifting to the right in the direction of stronger programs, in the direction of the kinds of things that we see the world's most secure sites doing already. These sites have raised the bar, and we are strengthening our programs, moving in their direction. What they do in a nutshell, what they do in summary, is they inventory information flows and then control those flows, control them physically. They deploy physical protection from attack information flows. And so I recommend that everyone listening learn about what these secure sites are doing today, because what they're doing today, all of us are going to wind up doing tomorrow. We can decide which of their techniques we're going to use first and second and third, but we're sooner or later, all of us going to be using those techniques. So if you'd like more information on what they do, on their methodology, as I said, Waterfall still has an inventory of my latest book available. Go to the URL on the screen here, waterfall-security.com/sec-ot, and request a copy, and we'd be happy to send you one. That's what I had for you. Thank you very much. Daniela, do we have any questions backed up?
Thank you, Andrew. And yes, we have questions. Thank you for everybody online who has submitted questions. If you haven't gotten your questions submitted yet, please do get it in. We will do our best to address all of the questions that we can within the time frame. So, Andrew, our first question is, in this time of pandemic travel restrictions, can we do remote access?
Yes. So as I said, Waterfall is giving away remote screen view licenses. If you look at the chapter 6 in the Black Book, where I talk about the 20 kinds of network architectures, there's 3 or 4 kinds of remote access documented in there. So let's look at the remote screen view is probably the most secure and the most conservative of those access mechanisms. How does it work? Let's take a concrete example. Let's say we have a power plant, and the vendor, the manufacturer of the steam turbine. This is a coal-fired power plant, or a gas-fired plant, natural gas plant. The people who manufacture the steam turbine, it might be GE, it might be Siemens, it might be ABB. They give us a warranty, a support contract for that turbine only if they can monitor the turbine 24 hours a day, so that they can find problems in the turbine that are building up. Because if you let these problems build up, the turbine is eventually going to, what is the enemy? The turbine is rotating equipment. Okay, rotating equipment wears out. The symptom of wearing out is vibration, or sometimes, hot spots. If we let these hot spots grow, we're going to wind up burning holes in parts of the turbine. If we let the vibrations grow, the turbine is eventually, it takes a couple of months, but it'll eventually shake itself apart. So these vendors have expert systems. They monitor these things, and they notice problems. How do we enable that? Well, unidirectional gateways can copy the turbine monitoring systems out, and now the vendors can monitor the turbines, monitor the replicas of the management systems. Their systems think they're still talking to the original. Everything works, and every few months they find a problem starting to build up, because things happen, things wear out. What do they do then? Well, they need to adjust these turbines. These turbines have a lot of adjustments. You need to adjust them to, dampen down to get rid of this vibration before it builds up into a big problem. So what they do is, they pick up the phone, they call the power plant, and they say, this is the vendor. You've got a problem with generating unit number 3. A vibration's building up. Can I have an hour on Thursday at 3 o'clock to fix the problem? And they say, yes, we've booked you for an hour Thursday at 3 o'clock. Well, Thursday at 3 o'clock comes, and an engineer sits down inside the site, inside the power plant, and calls up the vendor and says, okay, are you ready for this? And the power plant says, yep, we're ready. And the engineer turns on remote screen view on the turbine management workstation. And what remote screen view does, it starts taking pictures of the screen, just like remote desktop. It sends those pictures to the unidirectional gateway. The gateway sends them out, and on the outside, the gateway has a web server that can feed those pictures as a video stream out to the vendor. Now the vendor can see the screen. They can see the mouse moving. They can't move the mouse themselves. It's a unidirectional gateway. Nothing gets back, but they can see the screen. They can give advice. They can say, okay, let's bring up the vibration diagnostics. And they can see the mouse moving, and they can say, no, that's system diagnostics. Go 2 further down. There you go. That's vibration diagnostics. And they can give advice in real time and work with the engineer to solve the problem. And when they're doing this, the engineer sees this problem, differently than the vendor does. The vendor sees the procedure as supervising the site to make sure that a complicated, fix is applied properly. But the engineer sees it differently. How does the engineer see it? The engineer sees it as, well, whose turbine is this? It's not the vendor's turbine. It's our turbine. Thank you. And we want to know what the vendor has done to our equipment. And so the engineer is not a mouse monkey. The engineer is moving the mouse and typing on the keyboard only when she is convinced that she understands why she's doing what she's doing and that it's safe to do to the turbine. The engineer sees the process as supervising the vendor and taking notes and understanding what the vendor has done. Each of them thinks they're supervising the other. Together, they get the problem solved. It all works. So this is the most common kind of remote access that we see, but there's 3 or 4 others documented in the Black Book. A lot of people imagine that unidirectional gateways, they wipe out, they eliminate, they just block all possible remote access. It's not true. You can have remote access in ways that are much safer than firewalls and VPNs and passwords and software. So that's a long answer. I hope that dealt with the question.
Thank you, Andrew. For the next questions, the solution secure remote support, does it use the reversible gateway? Can my existing Waterfall unidirectional gateway be adapted to be a reversible gateway?
So there's several kinds of hardware in the Waterfall family of products. The classic unidirectional gateway is one way out, nothing back, period. That's it. That's a unidirectional gateway. If you want a reversible gateway, that's a different piece of hardware. It has some of the same electronics inside, but it has a bunch of extra stuff as well. So we call that the Waterfall flip. It is a kind of unidirectional gateway. It acts like a unidirectional gateway. It's only one way, but it's one way out or one way back. So no, there's no way to convert to change a unidirectional gateway into a flip. They're two different hardware products. They run a lot of the same software because we have to replicate servers, but they're two different pieces of hardware. I hope that answers it.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. For the next question, how is a unidirectional gateway different from an outbound only firewall?
Yes, well, a lot of people who are very familiar with firewalls, they know that, sort of first generation, 2007 through 2013, first generation advice for industrial control systems said, look, configure your firewall, the firewall between the industrial site and the enterprise network, the IT/OT firewall. Configure the firewall to allow nothing in except, certain connections that you do allow, connections to the historian, connections to the OPC server. Allow connections out, but allow nothing back in. And people imagine this is a one-way firewall, but it's not, because even if we allow no connections back in, even if the only connections we allow are from the industrial network out, every one of those connections is a TCP connection. Every TCP connection is two-way. What's happening on those questions, or on those connections? There's questions going out, there's data coming back, or there's questions coming in, there's answers going out. There's two-way communication on every one of those TCP connections. And people imagine that if they allow only connections out and nothing back in, nothing bad will happen. Well, here's an example. Let's say the connection out is to a web server. It's a documentation server full of PDF files, so our technicians can, figure out what the procedure is when they're doing a repair that they're not familiar with. Well, the web client inside the control system opened the connection to the web server through the firewall, didn't it? And pulled a PDF file in. What happens if the PDF files have been infected with viruses? A virus got in and infected all the PDF files. Now we've pulled that attack through the firewall on a connection that we opened from the inside network to the outside. The direction you open the connection doesn't really mean anything as long as the connection itself is two-way. And pretty much all TCP protocols are two-way at the application layer. So there's really no such thing as an outbound only firewall. You know, the unidirectional gateway, Waterfall's gateways are physically one way out, nothing back, and they've been common criteria certified. So this means they have had, you know, some very smart people take them apart and figure out, can anything ever get back in? And we're common criteria certified to the highest level that is internationally recognized for the common criteria system. There's no such thing for a firewall. You can't get a firewall common criteria certified to be one way. It's not possible. So long answer again, sorry. I hope I answered that.
Okay, thank you. And other questions coming up. How do you see the regulatory landscape changing to conform to these measures you discussed?
The regulatory landscape really depends on your geography. So in Israel, I'm told that unidirectional gateways are required for pretty much all critical infrastructure, but those regulations are for official use only. It's for it's need to know. I'm told that I'm not an Israeli citizen. I don't have a need to know, and so I've never seen the regulations. I'm told the same thing is true in South Korea, but I've never seen the regulations. I have seen the regulations in France. They require unidirectional gateways between class 3 networks and any lower networks. Class 3 is generally their safety critical networks. They recommend unidirectional gateways between their class 2 networks and their class 1 networks. The class 2 networks are reliability critical networks for critical infrastructure. In Singapore, again, I'm told that unidirectional gateways are required for certain kinds of critical infrastructure. But again, I've never seen the regulation because, I'm not a Singaporean citizen. I don't need to know. So in certain jurisdictions, we are seeing these technologies, the unidirectional technologies, unidirectional gateways being required. In North America, in the nuclear generation sector, they're required. In the conventional power generation sector, they're encouraged. The NERC-CIP standards, they relax something like 33, 31, 35 of their requirements if you've got unidirectional protection. And if you've got a firewall, well, you got to do everything. So, it really depends on the geography. Some geographies, some jurisdictions require the gateways, and others recommend the gateways. But basically, all of the modern advice that's been coming out in about the last 5 years of industrial security is positioning unidirectional gateways as part of the answer. It may be optional, it may be required, but it's in all of the modern advice. I mean, have a look at the Industrial Internet Consortium Security Framework. There's 2 or 3 pages in there on, unidirectional gateways. So I hope that's a useful answer.
Thank you, Andrew. We have more questions. The Waterfall unidirectional gateway can support both of TCP and UDP.
So the short answer is, if that's a question, can we support both TCP and UDP?
Yeah.
The short answer is yes, but almost nobody does that. So if you look at the Waterfall product line, we have software connectors for a lot of industrial systems, for all of the historians, for all of the versions of and variations of OPC, for lots of industrial protocols. And you might look at that and say, why are you using so many connectors? Why would you do that? Why would you have so many connectors? All historians, you connect to them using TCP. All the OPC connections are TCP. All of the industrial protocols are TCP. Why don't you just use a TCP connection? And the answer is that if you did, nothing would work very well, because all of those protocols are two-way at the application layer. Let's say we're accessing an Oracle database. What do? We send a query in, we get an answer back. The fact that you've done some kind of weird TCP thing through the gateway is not useful. If there's no way to send a question in, you get no answer back. What you have to do is put an Oracle server on the other network. If it's Oracle on one side, it's Oracle on the other side. You need the gateway software to ask the Oracle database regularly, usually once a second, what's changed? Tell me what's changed. Send the changes out and make the replica, make the copy a synchronized copy of the original. And now you can send on the outside, on the other network, you can send your questions to the Oracle database, to the replica, to the copy, and it'll answer normally. You know, sending TCP through the gateway is generally only useful if you've got some very specialized protocols. We almost never see it used. The most common place I have seen it used is if we're working with an industrial site that has a bunch of custom software. Now, most industrial sites, they don't like custom software because they're not in the business of writing software. They're in the business of, you know, producing gasoline or clean water. But a lot of industrial sites have a little custom software. If we need to make a copy of something custom, you know, sometimes the easiest way to do it is work with the site, have them, you know, build a little bit of code that can do a one-way TCP connection. But it's very unusual. Most people are using the off-the-shelf products. Most people are using the off-the-shelf connectors, and TCP, you know, is not the right way to do that. So it's a confusing thing. Yes, we have it on the product line if you need it, but almost nobody needs it. If you think you need it, give us a call. There's no cost. If you want to talk to us, give us a call. We will, you know, we'll do a free consultation. There's no charge for it, and let's understand what you need, and we'll, you know, look through our offering and make a recommendation and say, well, you could solve your problem this way or that way or the other way. You know, here's the costs and benefits of each, and then you can make a decision. There's no charge for that kind of analysis. We do it routinely. Give us a call and let's work through what you really need. Occasionally you need it, but most of the time you don't.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got a couple of minutes past the time of the hour, so I want to be respectful for everyone's time. As a reminder, all webinar registrants will receive a follow-up email on how to access a recorded version of this webinar and information on the upcoming webinars on other topics. I want to thank all of our attendees who listened and submitted some very good questions. I apologize that we didn't get to answer all of the questions. At this point, I want to give Andrew the opportunity of the last words. Andrew?
I just want to say thank you to everyone, and like I said, you have my email there. I'm happy to chat with you. If you have a network design that you would like to ask, you know, how could we protect this unidirectionally? What would the world's most secure sites do? I'm happy to talk to you. If you have technology, if you have a perspective, if you have an industrial site, I'd love to have you as a guest on the Industrial Security Podcast. So send me an email and let's see what we can work out.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And thank you for all of you. Andrew, you have something more to say, or?
No, I'm good. Just a reminder that for anyone who, if you know anyone who missed the webinar, we're going to be making a recording of the webinar available, and we'll send you email. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.